I found the love letters he wrote to someone else. Then I was reborn, still his wife. But not the same woman. I won't beg this time. I won't shrink myself to fit his silence. This time I'll dance, not for him, not for forgiveness, but because the stage was never theirs to give. It was always mine. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't always announce itself with tears or hysteria. Sometimes it just sits with you, quiet, dense, like fog on your chest that never lifts. It was that kind of grief that had kept me from touching David's things after the funeral. But on the 49th day after his death, a date my mother always said marked the final passing of a soul, I climbed the attic stairs alone. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe something that would prove I hadn't imagined the past 40 years of marriage. Maybe a reason to believe he had loved me in his own way, even if he never said it much. What I found instead was a leather-bound journal tucked between old records and lecture notes. It was old, edges worn, the cover soft from years of use. I recognized it instantly. David used to write in it every evening after dinner, sitting by the window with a glass of hot milk, glasses perched low on his nose. I'd asked once years ago what he was writing. Philosophy, he'd said. Apparently philosophy had a name. And it wasn't mine. The journal was filled cover to cover in neat, slanted handwriting. Elegant, dense. But not English. Not even French, which David sometimes quoted to impress guests. It was German. I couldn't read a word of it. At first I thought maybe it really was just thoughts. Academic reflections. I wanted it to be something mundane. I needed it to be. But my hands trembled as I turned each page. Page after page after page, and every one of them began the same way, like a printed script etched by hand. Mein liebst Hannah. My dearest Hannah. Not Laura. Not once. The next day I waited until Lily, my granddaughter, came home. She had just returned from a postgraduate program in Berlin, sharp as a blade and fluent in the language of David's secrets. I sat her down at the kitchen table and handed her the journal. She opened it casually, unaware of the tremor in my voice when I asked, "Could you tell me what it says?" She skimmed a few lines, then chuckled. "Grandpa was such a romantic," she said. My heart clenched. She read aloud, smiling, "My dearest Hannah, I saw your favorite flowers today, Edelweiss, just like the ones we picked on the hillside. I miss your smile more than words can carry." She looked up. "Was Hannah one of your friends?" The room spun slightly. "No," I whispered. "No, she wasn't." Lily looked confused. "Oh. But every page starts like that, Mein liebst Hannah. The whole thing's like a series of love letters." The kettle whistled behind me. I didn't hear it. My ears had gone numb. Hannah. A name that meant nothing to Lily but everything to me now. A stranger who had existed alongside my entire marriage. Whose memory had occupied David's most private thoughts. Whose name had filled a journal while I filled his coffee cup. I stood up too fast. The edge of the table scraped against my thigh, but I barely felt it. "Grandma." Lily's voice seemed distant. "Are you okay?" But I wasn't. My legs gave out beneath me. The last thing I saw was the journal sliding from Lily's hands and the blur of her figure rushing toward me. Then everything turned black. When I opened my eyes again, everything felt puff. The ceiling above me wasn't the pale beige of my bedroom. It was pure white, cold, impersonal. Too familiar in a distant sort of way. I blinked, adjusting to the light, and felt a stiffness in my limbs I hadn't known in years. I turned my head slightly. And gasped. There beside me lay David. Not the white-haired man whose funeral I'd attended. Oh, this was David in his 20s. His jaw smooth, his skin clear, his black hair thick and unruly the way it had been when we first married. He was fast asleep, chest rising and falling rhythmically, mouth slightly open as he always slept when he was young. Panic rose in my throat. I sat up slowly and the room began to shift into place. The dresser. The single window. The wooden framed mirror. All of it exactly as it had been in the early years of our marriage. The calendar on the wall read, June 15, 1988. I gripped the bedsheet. My breath caught in my chest. This was real. Somehow, impossibly, I had returned to the past. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and steadied myself. My body felt different. Younger. The heaviness in my knees and hips was gone. My hands were smooth again. My vision clearer than it had been in decades. I stumbled to the mirror and looked at my reflection. There she was, me. But not the tired, gray-haired widow. This was the Laura from 35 years ago. Newly married. Barely beginning her descent into silence. I reached up and touched my face, half expecting it to melt under my fingertips. But it was real. I was real. The sounds of the house stirred around me. David yawned and rolled over, muttering in his sleep. I stepped back as if looking at a sleeping stranger. Because that's what he was now. I knew what lay ahead in this house. The dinners eaten in silence, the birthdays forgotten, the cold glances, the worship of a ghost named Hannah. I had lived it all once. But not this time. No. This time I would not be the woman who waited politely for scraps of affection. I moved slowly through the bedroom, touching objects I hadn't seen in years. My old jewelry box with the ballerina figurine. The yellow silk scarf I used to wear on Wednesdays. A framed wedding photo on the nightstand, both of us stiff and awkward like children playing adults. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. Only fire. Later that morning I sat at the kitchen table, hands folded neatly. David entered, freshly shaved, dressed in a blue button-down. He didn't look at me. He never did really. He poured himself a cup of coffee and walked past without a word. I studied him, truly studied him. Handsome. Charming in a professorly way. Polished. But cold. Always cold. I had a strange dream, I said casually. He looked up briefly, one eyebrow raised. I dreamed that you were dead. That I found your journal. That every word in it was a love letter to a woman named Hannah. David froze, his mug halfway to his lips. He recovered quickly, forcing a short laugh. Well, that's an odd thing to say. Is it? He took a sip and turned toward the hallway. Don't be dramatic, Laura. That was always his favorite line. Don't be dramatic. Don't be emotional. Don't ask for too much. Just don't be. When he left for work, I sat alone at the table. The journal didn't exist in this time. Not yet. But the truth had never changed. He had loved Hannah. Not me. He had spent a lifetime pining after a woman he'd never had the courage to marry, and used me as a stand-in. This time I would not let myself be used. I looked down at my hands again. Steady. Young. Capable. I could walk away before the bruises on my heart ever formed. That evening I stood at the window watching the sunset. It bled across the sky like a wound, brilliant and unflinching. David hadn't come home yet. Not that it mattered. I had already begun packing things in my mind. Memories, disappointments, realizations. I opened my closet and pulled out the red dress. I hadn't worn it in my first life until after he left me. This time I would wear it for myself. I hung it on the door, smoothing out the fabric. Tomorrow I would call Miss Wong. Tomorrow I would start again. But tonight I let myself sit quietly, one hand resting over my chest. And I whispered to the past, to the girl I once was, and to the man sleeping down the hall. You don't get to write my story this time. I had forgotten how sharp mornings could be. The cold tile under my feet. The soft rustle of bedsheets as David stirred. The smell of instant coffee from the kitchen. Always slightly burnt because he let the kettle boil too long. These tiny discomforts had once dulled me into routine. Now every one of them scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. I sat on the edge of the bed in silence. David rolled over beside me. Still half asleep, his brow furrowed slightly when he saw me dressed. You're up early, he mumbled. I didn't sleep much. He stretched, yawning, and made no effort to ask why. Typical. He moved through his morning without another word to me, just the shuffle of dress shoes and the sound of a belt buckle snapping into place. When he passed me again, coffee in hand, he looked annoyed. There's no breakfast? I met his gaze. I didn't feel well this morning. He frowned. You still could have made something. I have to leave in 15 minutes. A reply rose in my throat, sharp, biting, but I swallowed it. Not yet. Not today. I've been nauseous since yesterday. It hasn't gone away. David sighed loudly. It's probably nothing. Take some soda water. It's more than that, I said slowly. I think I need to go to the hospital. He paused in front of the mirror, adjusting his collar. I've got meetings all day. So you won't take me? He turned to face me. Why would I waste time at the hospital when you're obviously fine enough to sit there and talk about it? And there it was, the cold dismissal I remembered so well. The same look he gave me in my first life when I was sick in bed and begged him to check on me. He had gone to Hannah's graduation instead. That day hadn't changed. But I had. It took everything in me to stand upright, grab my purse and leave the house on my own. My stomach churned, each step down the front path making the world sway just slightly under my feet. I flagged a taxi, my voice barely loud enough for the driver to hear. "St. Michael's Hospital, please." He looked back with concern. "You all right, miss?" "I will be," I murmured. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and old sweat. The chairs in the waiting room were just as I remembered them, worn, uncomfortable, lined against a wall of hopeless stares and shallow coughs. I sat quietly until they called my name. The young nurse barely looked older than me. She took my blood pressure, checked my eyes, asked the same polite questions I'd been asked decades ago. The doctor came in shortly after. Middle-aged, kind-faced, with a tired smile. Mrs. Bennett?" He corrected himself after glancing at my chart. "Your symptoms sound like a case of acute gastritis. Likely stress-induced. And based on your blood pressure, you're dehydrated." I nodded. He looked at me more closely. "You need rest. A few days of observation and fluid support. Do you have someone to stay with you? A husband?" I hesitated. "No," I said. "Not really." He didn't press further. That night, I lay alone in a hospital bed, staring out the window as the sky faded from gold to indigo. I hadn't called David. I wouldn't. The 4 dripped steadily beside me, a metronome ticking in time with my resolve. I thought about the past. About how this exact moment had played out once already. In that life I had called him. He hadn't picked up. I had texted. He didn't reply. And when I came home days later, he hadn't asked what the doctor said. He only asked why I hadn't cooked dumplings for his mother. A nurse brought me soup and medicine around 8:30. She was gentle, cheerful in the way that only hospital nurses could be. When she asked if I needed anything else, I said no. But my chest ached. Not from illness. From memory. This hospital, this illness, this neglect. It had all been a quiet tragedy before. A muted scream into an uncaring void. But this time I felt the scream building in my throat. I wasn't going to swallow it. In the morning, I woke to sunlight pouring through the window and a folded paper on the tray beside me. It was the meal list. I stared at it a moment too long before reaching for the pen and checking the boxes for plain rice and boiled vegetables. I hadn't felt hungry in days. David didn't call. No surprise there. The absence didn't hurt. Not like before. I lay back against the pillows and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, I wasn't thinking about David. I was thinking about the girl I once was, myself at 25. Hopeful. Soft-spoken. Always trying to be agreeable. Always minimizing my own needs so I wouldn't seem difficult. That girl had laid in this bed once and cried because her husband hadn't come. This time I didn't cry. This time I didn't even want him to. I was discharged after 2 days with prescriptions and gentle warnings. Avoid stress, the doctor advised. Eat regularly. And rest. I nodded obediently. But I knew rest would come only after action. When I returned home, the house smelled like damp towels and old cologne. David wasn't there. On the kitchen table sat a folded note. "Mom wants dumplings for dinner tonight. Come back early to prepare. David." My hand shook with something between rage and hysterical laughter. He didn't ask where I'd been. He hadn't noticed I was gone. I crumpled the note and threw it directly into the trash. I didn't even aim. I stood in the bedroom for a long time just staring at myself in the mirror. My eyes were clearer. My jaw was tighter. There was something in my face I hadn't seen before. Resolve. On the closet rail hung the red dress. The same one I'd saved in secret for years. The one I'd once hoped to wear for a night he'd remember. He never gave me that night. But I would give it to myself. I touched the fabric lightly. Velvet. Worn. Untouched. Like me. But no more. That evening, David returned home around 6 o'clock. He looked surprised to see me sitting in the living room with the lights on and no apron. "Did you start the dumplings?" he asked. I looked at him. My eyes didn't blink. No. His brows furrowed. "Why not?" I left a note. "I was in the hospital," I said. "For 2 days." He paused, the change in routine only now dawning on him. "Hospital. Gastritis," I said. "Stress-induced." "Well, that's inconvenient," he muttered. "You should have told me. You didn't ask." His face twitched. "You're being unfair." No, I said slowly. I'm finally being fair. To myself. He didn't respond. He went into the kitchen and opened the fridge. You didn't cook anything? I stood. Calmly. Deliberately. And walked to the bedroom. Where are you going? He asked, tone rising. To bed, I said. I closed the door behind me and locked it. That night I stared at the ceiling again. Only this time I wasn't floating in grief. I was anchored in purpose. This marriage had always been a silence I drowned in. But now I saw the ladder. The first rung had been walking into that hospital alone. The second would come tomorrow. And then the next, until I climbed free. I had always saved the red dress for a special occasion. But the occasion had never come, not in the way I once hoped. I had imagined a romantic dinner, a rare smile from David, maybe even a compliment. Something small to hold on to. It never happened. Instead, the dress hung in the back of the closet, wrapped in plastic like a promise I never got to open. But now it was no longer a promise. It was a declaration. And I was ready to wear it, for myself. I pulled it from its hanger gently, my fingers brushing along the velvet. The fabric was deep crimson, soft as a whisper, with a modest neckline and a waist that flared just enough to feel elegant. I laid it out on the bed and smoothed the wrinkles carefully. David was not home. I hadn't asked where he was. I didn't care. My hands moved with purpose. I stepped into the dress, zipped it up and walked to the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different. The red lit something inside her eyes. A quiet blaze. She stood taller even if her heart was still mending. For once I didn't imagine him looking at me. I imagined myself dancing. The phone sat on the desk like an old enemy. I hadn't touched it in days, not since calling the hospital for a follow-up. My fingers hovered over the dial, then pressed each number with deliberate slowness. One ring. Two. On the third, a familiar voice answered, raspy and warm. Hello. Miss Wong? I asked. There was a pause. Yes. I swallowed. It's Laura. Laura Bennett. Another pause. Then breathlessly, Laura? Yes. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, she said, her voice lifting in surprise. It's been years. I thought you were overseas. I was here all along, I said softly. Just, not myself. Miss Wong was silent for a beat, then spoke gently as if sensing something in my voice. Are you all right? I don't know, I admitted. But I think I'm ready to come back. To the troop. To myself. That made her laugh, a soft, delighted sound. Then come, she said. Anytime. We're still in the same studio. Tomorrow. Tomorrow is perfect. That night, David returned home after 9 p.m. He looked tired and for the first time in a long while he noticed something was different. He paused in the doorway looking at me still wearing the red dress, sitting calmly on the couch with a book in hand. What's that for? He asked. Nothing, I said. Or maybe everything. He frowned. Are you going somewhere? I'm going back to the dance troupe. He blinked. You're what? I've already spoken to Miss Wong. He scoffed lightly. It's been 3 years. You think you can just pick up where you left off? No, I said. But I'm going to try. He didn't speak. Just walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge. You didn't cook again? No. Right, he muttered. I didn't argue. I simply stood, walked past him and returned to the bedroom, head held high. The next morning I woke before the sun. Nerves tingled through my fingertips as I buttoned my blouse and tied my hair back. I chose simple clothes. A clean white shirt and gray slacks, flat shoes, minimal makeup. I didn't want to impress anyone. I just wanted to show up. That was enough. The taxi ride to the studio was short but filled with memories. Every street corner we passed brought back a glimpse of my old self. 22, full of hope, eating cheap lunch boxes with the other dancers, waiting for Miss Wong's corrections like praise. When I stepped out of the car and faced the old studio building, my breath caught. The outside hadn't changed. Peeling white walls, faded gold signage, a single cracked window that had never been replaced. But to me it looked like the beginning of a new life. Miss Wong met me at the entrance. She was just as I remembered, slightly hunched, wearing a paisley scarf and flat shoes, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. When she saw me, her face broke into a wide smile. Laura. Miss Wong. He didn't hesitate. She hugged me tightly. You haven't changed at all, she said. I have, I whispered. She pulled back and studied my face. Good. Change is necessary. We walked together through the halls. The sound of piano keys and laughter drifted from the practice rooms. The scent of sweat, resin, and worn leather filled the air. Every note of it struck my memory like a tuning fork. I still can't believe you're back, Miss Wong said. I almost didn't come. But you did, she said. That's what matters. She brought me to the main studio, a wide, mirrored space with scuffed floors and worn bars lining the walls. There were dancers inside already, rehearsing a contemporary piece with flowing sleeves and sharp turns. They moved with grace and grit, raw talent in every line. They stopped when they saw us. Miss Wong clapped her hands. Everyone, this is Laura Bennett. She was one of our most promising dancers a few years ago. Their eyes fell on me, some curious, others indifferent. She's thinking about rejoining, Miss Wong continued. Let's welcome her warmly. A few nodded. One girl clapped politely. I smiled, though my pulse thundered. You can sit and watch for now, Miss Wong whispered. Or stretch. Take your time. I walked slowly to the corner of the room and sat down on the floor, back straight, legs folded neatly. The movements unfolding in front of me were mesmerizing, but familiar. Not just from muscle memory. From soul memory. I used to move like that. Though I still could. After an hour, Miss Wong approached me quietly. You want to try something? Yes, I said before fear could change my mind. I stood, removed my shoes and stepped barefoot onto the floor. The other dancers paused. One of them moved aside so I could take her place in the center. Miss Wong didn't give me choreography. She simply nodded. Show me what's left in you. The music began. A simple piece. Soft piano. Minor key. Slow tempo. I closed my eyes. And moved. My limbs remembered more than I did. Arms cutting the air like thread, feet brushing the ground with cautious grace. My joints ached, but the ache wasn't weakness. It was awakening. I moved as if I were unsealing something that had been locked away for years. With every turn, I shed a little more of the silence I had carried. With every reach, I pulled back a piece of myself from the shadows. By the time the music faded, I was panting softly, chest heaving, sweat blooming on my brow. The room was silent. Then, a single clap. Then another. And then the entire troupe joined in. Miss Wong's eyes glistened. Still breathtaking. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I smiled. A real one. We sat on the edge of the practice platform together, drinking lukewarm tea Miss Wong had stashed in a thermos. You're going to have to rebuild your stamina, she said. I know. Your knees might protest. They already are. But your lines, she said almost to herself. Still so clean. So precise. I looked at her. I want to come back. Then come, she said as if it were the simplest thing in the world. I hesitated. What if I can't catch up? You're not here to catch up, she replied. You're here to continue. I left the studio with sore legs and a light heart. The world outside looked clearer than it had in years. I walked slowly, watching the sun drip through the trees like melted gold. David would be home waiting. Not for me. For food. For submission. But I had nothing left to offer him. At least nothing he would recognize. That night I didn't cook. I didn't explain. I simply stepped out of my shoes, placed my script and studio schedule on the table, and sat with my feet tucked under me. David glanced at the paper. You're going back permanently? Yes. You think you're still that girl who used to dance all day and eat instant noodles? No, I said. She died in this house. He looked startled. Just a flicker. I'm not doing this for you, I added. I'm doing it for the girl who never got to leave. The next morning I arrived at the dance troupe 30 minutes before call time. The hallway lights were still dim. Most of the dancers hadn't arrived. The janitor was mopping near the lockers, humming a tune I didn't recognize. It felt sacred, this hush before the day officially began. I changed in silence. My practice clothes felt tighter than I remembered, not just in size but in memory. The last time I wore them I had been full of conviction, dreams spinning like pirouettes in my head. Now conviction remained, but it had traded naivete for something quieter. Grit. When I entered the studio the air was still and waiting. I stood at the bar and began my warm-ups. First position. Think. Ply. Relief. Hold. My legs trembled after 10 minutes. My hips ached. My back strained. But I kept going. Because beneath all the soreness my body remembered. And it was starting to forgive me. By the time the others arrived, I had already broken into a sweat. The younger dancers entered in clusters. Laughing, stretching, filling the space with their youth. They were all in their early 20s, most of them just a few years older than I appeared to be now. But I had lived more lifetimes than any of them. They looked at me curiously, not unkindly. Just unsure. One of them, a girl with sharp cheekbones and a tight bun, whispered to another, "Isn't she a bit old school?" I smiled. I'd expected worse. Miss Wong clapped her hands and signaled the start of the morning class. "Let's begin." We lined up at the bar. I took a spot at the end, close to the mirror but far from the center. I didn't need eyes on me just yet. The pianist began to play. We moved through exercises. Tendis. Degages. Rond de jam. The motions came back but my stamina betrayed me. The third set into the routine, my thighs burned. My calves cramped. My chest heaved. So I didn't stop. When I faltered I caught myself. When I stumbled I turned it into a stretch. But I felt it. My age, my absence, the gap between memory and muscle. After class I limped to the locker room and collapsed onto the bench, gasping. My water bottle felt like salvation. Miss Wong entered behind me and sat down, not speaking for a while. Finally she said, "You made it through." "Barely." She smiled. "It's a start." That became the rhythm of my days. I arrived before sunrise. I stretched until my legs trembled. I rehearsed until the studio emptied out. At night I went home, wrapped my knees in cloth soaked in eucalyptus oil, and forced myself not to cry when the pain became too much. It wasn't just physical. Some days I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. Not because I had aged, but because I couldn't tell whether the fire inside me still belonged to a dancer, or just a woman desperate to matter again. The others improved quickly. They learned combinations in a single afternoon. They picked up new routines like water into their hands. Me. It took me 2 hours to master a single 8-count spin. One afternoon, while attempting a lift for the third time with one of the junior male dancers, I slipped and landed awkwardly on my side. Pain shot through my hip. Not sharp, just dull enough to remind me I wasn't 20 anymore. He looked down at me, hesitant. "You okay?" "I'm fine." He offered a hand but I stood on my own. Later, as I sat icing the spot near the windows, 2 girls nearby whispered, "She's too stiff. Miss Wong is just being kind. Maybe she used to be good but..." They didn't finish. They didn't have to. That night I nearly didn't come back. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at my bloated knees and the deep purple bruise along my hip bone, and I thought, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm chasing a version of myself that no longer exists. Maybe it's time to give up before I embarrass myself further. But then I remembered the hospital bed. The silent dinners. The ignored birthdays. The red dress that waited in my closet for years. And I stood up. Is this pain? It was the price of reclaiming myself. The following morning I didn't just show up early. I showed up furious. At my doubt. At my body. At the version of Laura who had allowed herself to disappear for so long. I pushed harder than I had before. My breath was ragged by mid-morning. My muscles screamed. My bun unraveled. But for the first time the beat of the music moved through me, not around me. I wasn't performing. I was remembering. During a break, Miss Wong called me into her office. "You're overworking." "I'm rebuilding," I replied. "I see that," she said, leaning back in her chair. "But you're also carrying something too heavy. Guilt." I didn't answer. "You're not here to prove your worth to them," she continued. "You're here to recover it for yourself. I'm not the same dancer." "No one is," she said. "That's the point." The small breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday. We were learning a solo routine. Fluid, grounded, slow. It was about loss. About longing. Miss Wong looked at me. "Try it," she said. I hesitated. But I nodded. The music began. A single cello note, low and aching. I stepped forward. My feet moved without command. This time I didn't aim for perfection. I just let it all out. The anger, the sorrow, the betrayal, the weight of years. I danced until the room blurred. Until my breath ran dry. Until my knees shook. And when the final note faded, there was silence. Then applause. From every corner of the room. Even the girl with the sharp cheekbones clapped. Miss Wong wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, "That's the Laura I remember." That night I limped home but lighter. David was asleep when I arrived. Or pretending to be. I walked past him, laid down on the bed and stared at the ceiling. And for the first time in years I whispered not to him but to myself. "You still belong on stage." The studio's rehearsal had drained every ounce of strength from me. My muscles were sore and my shoulder ached from the final routine. But despite the fatigue, there was peace in my steps as I walked home. My hair damp with sweat, my sneakers stained with chalk dust. I had begun to carve something for myself. A life outside of David. Outside of marriage. Outside of silence. I turned the key in the apartment door, expecting the usual stillness. David rarely returned before dark. Most nights we existed like shadows passing through the same house. But today the silence was broken by an urgent knock. I opened the door to find Mrs. Reed, our upstairs neighbor, nose twitching, lips pressed tight in a mix of gossip and concern. "Laura. Thank goodness you're home." "What is it?" Her eyes were wide. "It's David." My heart skipped. "What happened?" He was carried out of a motel this afternoon. I saw the ambulance, Laura. He was bleeding. There was a woman with him crying, dark hair, pretty. "You should go to the hospital." "A motel?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated, then said, "Room 304. The West End Inn." I didn't ask anything more. I grabbed my coat. By the time I reached the hospital, the fluorescent lights above the emergency ward cast a sterile, too bright glow. The receptionist asked whom I was here for. "David Bennett," I said. He checked the clipboard. "He's in room 207. Minor head injury, bruised ribs. Stable." I walked the hallway slowly, each footstep a reminder of the weight in my chest. Room 207's door was ajar. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. David lay on the bed, his face pale but conscious. A bandage wrapped around his forehead. His wrist was taped and a mild fore ran into his arm. And sitting beside him, tears streaming down her face, was Hannah. Her presence hit me like cold water. She was as I remembered from the old wedding photos David's mother used to keep. Delicate, soft-featured, with a wistful kind of beauty that made people instinctively protect her. Her hair was tied in a neat low bun, her hands folded nervously in her lap. "Laura," she gasped, standing. "You're here." David turned his head toward me. His eyes flickered, guilt maybe. Or calculation. "What happened?" I asked, calm, controlled. Hannah spoke before he could. "It's my fault. David was just walking me back to the airport hotel. My husband, he saw us. He thought he misunderstood. There was a confrontation. It got physical." I stared at her, unblinking. "You were with a married man. In a motel room." No, she insisted. "We weren't doing anything. We just wanted to say goodbye. I'm flying back to Germany tomorrow." I looked at David. "Is that true?" He remained silent. Hannah stepped forward and took my hand, voice quivering. "Please don't be angry at David. He didn't mean for any of this to happen." "I'm sorry, Laura. Truly." I pulled my hand away. David sat up slightly, wincing. "I didn't cheat," he said. "Technically." That word, technically, was enough. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a folded paper and laid it on the hospital tray. "What's this?" he asked. "The divorce form," I replied. His eyes widened slightly. "You're serious?" "As serious as you were when you walked into that motel." He scoffed, half laughing. "You're overreacting." "I'm done reacting," I said. "This is clarity." Hannah turned pale. "Laura, please. Don't end your marriage over this. He still cares about you." I turned to her slowly. "Does he?" She looked down. David muttered, "We've been married for years, Laura. You're really going to throw all that away because of one mistake?" I stared at him. "You mean one visible mistake? The rest you hid behind German phrases and half-hearted routines." His mouth opened, then closed. "I read your journal, David," I said. "The one you wrote in every night. In German. Page after page, addressed to Hannah." He stiffened. Hannah looked horrified. "You never once wrote my name," I continued. "Not even by accident." "Laura, you don't understand." "No, David. You don't understand. You didn't have the courage to fight for Hannah when it mattered, so you settled for me. And you spent the rest of our marriage romanticizing the woman you never had. But you didn't love me. You used me to make your life look acceptable. You made me invisible. He flushed. Don't talk like that in front of Hannah. I laughed coldly. Is this your concern? Her comfort? Not mine. She's a guest. In our marriage? I cut in. She's been here longer than I have. Hannah's lips trembled. I didn't mean to come between you. I raised a hand. Please. Stop performing. You're not here by accident. She fell silent. David finally snapped. You know what? Maybe if you hadn't been so cold all the time, maybe if you'd supported me more, I wouldn't have needed to. To what? I said, voice rising, the first crack in my control. To crawl back to your first love like a coward? To spend every year of our marriage punishing me for not being her? The room was silent except for the beeping of the heart monitor. David looked away. I steadied my breath. I'll be at the Civil Affairs office tomorrow at 9 a.m., I said. If you don't show up, I'll file independently. He didn't answer. I turned to leave. Laura, wait, Hannah called out. Please don't go. I paused at the doorway. Then without turning back I said, you can keep the man who wrote you love letters in secret while lying next to his wife in bed. I'm done reading his lies. And I walked out. The city air hit me like a slap. It wasn't anger that filled me as I stood outside the hospital. It was relief. Not because David was gone, but because I finally was. The morning was quiet. No birdsong. No wind. Just the stillness of a world waiting for something to end. I stood by the window of the studio dormitory, a simple suitcase at my feet, dressed in a clean cream blouse and navy trousers. No makeup. No earrings. No perfume. I didn't want to mark this day with anything artificial. Only truth. At exactly 8:42 a.m., I left the troop quarters and took a taxi toward the Civil Affairs office. My hands trembled only once, when I passed the flower vendor near the old park. It reminded me of the first bouquet David ever gave me. Yellow lilies. I had dried them and placed them in a journal. A journal now buried beneath my return. The Civil Affairs office looked as it always had. Faded walls, fluorescent lights, people lined up for matters of love and legality. A woman was crying in the hallway, clutching a marriage certificate. Another couple laughed softly, clearly here to begin, not end. I waited on the red bench beside the faded bulletin board. David arrived at 9:03 a.m. He didn't speak at first. He was dressed in a wrinkled blazer and an unpressed shirt. His hair was combed but limp, like he hadn't really looked at himself in the mirror before leaving. He sat beside me with a sigh, arms crossed. You're early. I said 9 a.m. He nodded once. Still dramatic, I see. I ignored him. A clerk called our names. We sat across from a woman with tired eyes and a swift hand. She processed our paperwork without expression, just ticking boxes and handing over pens. David barely read anything. He signed quickly, muttering, I never thought it would come to this. I took my time. Every signature was a goodbye. To the girl I had once been. To the man he never was. To the life I had spent years watering, hoping something would grow. When the clerk stamped the final page, she glanced up. You'll both receive official confirmation by mail within the month. As of this morning, your marriage is legally dissolved. David looked at her. That's it. She blinked. That's it. He slumped back slightly. I stood. He followed me outside, silence stretching between us. On the sidewalk he turned. You're really just walking away? I already did, I said. Today was just the paperwork. I gave you years, he muttered. I gave you my youth. His jaw clenched. You think you're better off now? Living in some tiny room above a dance studio? Chasing a career that's already passed you by? That's the difference between us, I said. You think this is about winning. I think it's about being free. He stared at me. His eyes were tired. But there was no love in them. Only wounded pride. I never cheated, he said. Not technically. You never loved me, I replied. Not truthfully. He didn't follow me. He didn't try to explain. Because in his mind I was already gone. I returned to the house only once, to pack my things. The air inside felt stale. The scent of his cologne still lingered faintly in the bedroom. His tie was slung across the arm of the chair. A used cup sat unwashed by the sink. I packed only essentials. Some clothes, my practice shoes, a pair of black heels I hadn't worn in years, and the red dress. Everything else I left behind. I didn't take the wedding album. I didn't take the framed photo from our trip to Kyoto. And I didn't take the journal. That was his weight to carry. His mother called the next day. The screen lit up with her name, Mrs. Bennet. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. On the fourth call I picked up. Her voice was sharp. "You ungrateful girl." "Hello, Mrs. Bennet. What did you do to David?" "I divorced him." "You shamed our family." "Your son brought shame to your family when he took his lover to a motel in the middle of the afternoon." Silence. Then a hiss. "You think you're blameless?" "No," I said calmly. "I'm just done being your scapegoat." She exhaled sharply like she was about to continue, but I hung up and blocked the number. The troops' dormitory was nothing fancy, just a long hallway of narrow rooms, a shared bathroom and a tiny kitchen. My room had a twin bed, a folding desk, and a small window that overlooked the alley behind the building. But it was mine. No one asked me to cook. No one timed my silence. No one measured my worth against another woman's memory. That night I sat at the desk writing notes in my dance journal, marking where my muscles still resisted, where my timing faltered, what I wanted to improve. My legs were sore, my arms heavy, but my heart was light. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was renting space inside someone else's story. This was my narrative now. I lay back in bed and stared at the ceiling. The paint was cracked. The sheets were thin. But the piece was real. And as I closed my eyes, I whispered aloud, "Now the stage is mine alone." Every morning, the wooden floors of the studio creaked beneath our bodies like a stage, breathing in and out. I had moved into the troupe dormitory just 2 weeks ago, but it already felt like home. The sweat-slicked mirrors, the soft clatter of point shoes against tile, the sting of eucalyptus oil on sore limbs. The dorm bed was narrow, the shower always lukewarm, but my days were full of movement and my nights full of purpose. I was no longer dancing in memory. I was dancing to become someone new. Miss Wong called us to gather after rehearsal one humid Tuesday afternoon. We sat in a semicircle on the studio floor, water bottles in hand, bodies slumped from a long day of drills. She clapped once. "Listen up." Everyone straightened. "Our fall production will be The Red Thread. 2 acts, 1 main female lead. Auditions will be held this Friday." A murmur of interest rippled through the room. I watched the younger dancers exchange glances. Excitement, nerves, hunger. Miss Wong continued. "The lead has 6 solos. A deeply emotional arc, physicality and storytelling will both be tested. You'll each perform a chosen section in the audition. Only one can take the spotlight." My heart beat harder than it should have. I hadn't performed a solo on stage in nearly 4 years. Not since before the marriage. Not since before my name became small inside someone else's story. I walked back to my dorm that night slower than usual. The air was thick with pre-monsoon dampness. The street smelled like fried tofu and dust. The weight of that announcement pressed against me like a tide. Could I really do this? Would they even take me seriously? The next day, rehearsal opened with murmurs of a new dancer joining the troupe for the audition block. Her name was Isabel Chong. She arrived wearing pale gray tights and a black leotard, hair twisted into a perfect knot, skin flawless, gaze calm. She was tall, with long arms and natural turnout, what the ballet world used to call a born body. But there was nothing childlike about her. She was precise, confident, and already familiar with the choreography. Miss Wong introduced her briefly. Transferred from the Academy's advanced division. Here for the next 2 months. That was all it took. By the end of the warm-up, 3 girls were already whispering about how fluid her arabesques were. By lunch, everyone had seen her do 4 consecutive fouette turns without breaking a sweat. I stayed quiet. I knew that kind of girl. I used to be that kind of girl. That evening I stayed late in Studio B, running through my section of the solo, one of the more vulnerable pieces from The Red Thread. It told the story of a woman who lost her child and danced through grief until her hands remembered how to hold joy. I wasn't the most flexible anymore. But I understood grief. Better than anyone. I danced it over and over, even after my feet blistered through the bandages. I didn't want to win. I wanted to be worthy. The audition day came too soon. We drew lots for order. I was 7th. Isabel was 9th. I sat quietly backstage, stretching in the far corner, keeping my breath even. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Dancers doing last-minute warm-ups, whispering lines to themselves, checking hairpins and costume clasps. Miss Wong was one of the 3 on the judging panel. The others were troupe seniors, sharp-eyed, unreadable. One by one, dancers took the stage. Some were technically flawless but lacked depth. Some faltered. Some cried halfway through. Then it was my turn. The lights on stage weren't bright, they were harsh. They exposed everything. I took my position center floor, one hand outstretched, spine curved like I was carrying something invisible on my back. The music began. A slow, aching cello. Barely audible at first. I moved with it, not to impress but to say something I didn't know how to speak. The choreography told of loss, yes, but I let my body pour all of it in. The years of silence, the forgotten birthdays, the dinner plates cleared without thanks, the cold hands in shared beds. And then, something shifted. The grief softened. My feet lightened. My arms opened. I wasn't the woman who had lost everything anymore. I was the woman who chose herself. When the music ended, I stood alone, eyes closed, chest rising. There was no applause. Only silence. Then the next dancer was called. Isabel took the stage with grace and power. Her limbs cut the air like silk ribbons, her jumps sharp, her balances exact. The judges took notes more eagerly than they had for anyone else. She bowed with practiced humility and left the stage. I saw her glance at me once as she passed. There was no malice. Just quiet certainty that she had already won. The results were announced an hour later. The lead role in The Red Thread, Miss Wong said, goes to Isabel Chong. Some clapped. Some sighed. One girl stood up and left. I didn't react. Not even a blink. I simply walked over to Isabel, smiled and said, "You earned it. Congratulations." She looked surprised. "Thank you. I thought you were the favorite." "I'm not here to be anyone's favorite," I said. "I'm here to become my own." That night, I returned to my dorm room, changed into pajamas and sat at my desk to untie the ribbon from my old music notebook. Then there was a knock. It was Miss Wong. She entered without waiting, closed the door and handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "An invitation," she said. "To be understudy." I opened the paper. It was official. My name printed beneath Isabel's. "You still believe in me?" I asked. She looked at me serious. "I don't believe in past versions of you, Laura. I believe in the woman who walked off that stage without flinching." I held the paper gently. "I'll do it," I said. "I thought you might." She left. I folded the envelope and slipped it into my drawer beside my journal. As I turned out the lights, I whispered to the darkness, "I don't need the spotlight to be seen." And I meant it. Rehearsals continued like clockwork. While Isabel held the lead, I never let my role as understudy feel lesser. I arrived before call time, stayed after lights dimmed, and ran every solo as if the audience sat waiting behind the mirrors. I knew the counts by heart, the steps by feel. Not just where to place my feet, but where to leave my soul behind after every movement. Isabel, for her part, remained dazzling, technically flawless, confident, adored. But she had begun arriving later, warming up less, laughing off corrections with a careless shrug. "I've done this solo 100 times, she told one of the junior dancers with a toss of her head. "It's in my bones." Miss Wong said nothing. But she noticed. The day of the fall performance arrived like a hush before a storm. The theater buzzed with preparation. Costumes were steamed, lights tested, the orchestra did final tuning. Flowers were already arriving backstage. Isabel flitted about, dressed in silk robes and confidence. She'd been featured in the promotional poster. Her form mid-leap, arms like wings, the caption, "The Red Thread returns with a rising star." She looked like she belonged on a pedestal. But even pedestals crack. 1 hour before curtain, I was in the dressing room quietly reviewing notes. Suddenly the door burst open. A junior dancer rushed in, breathless. She fell. My heart stopped. Who? Isabel. During warm-ups. She landed wrong from a grand jeté. Her ankles swelling fast. I didn't move at first. Just breathed. Then I stood and grabbed my emergency kit. Backstage was chaos. Isabel was seated on a bench, clutching her ankle. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, not from pain but panic. She looked up at Miss Wong with pleading eyes. I can dance. I'll just ice it. You can't even point your foot, Miss Wong replied calmly. The director, a man named Jerome, looked frantic. What do we do? We don't have another lead. Miss Wong turned to me. Yes, we do. The room went silent. I stepped forward. I know the entire role, I said. Jerome looked at me as if only now noticing I existed. Are you ready? I've been ready. Miss Wong nodded once. Get her in costume. We have 20 minutes. The costume fit. Barely. The bodice had been tailored for Isabel's longer torso, but my body filled it in a different way, less perfect, more present. A makeup artist quickly touched up my face. Someone else tightened the bun in my hair. My shoes were already broken in. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't need to. As the overture began, I stood in the wings, just beyond the red curtain, my heart slamming like thunder inside a hollow ribcage. Then the curtain rose. The opening light was soft like dawn. I stepped forward. The first notes of my solo began. I forgot the crowd. I forgot the past. I became her, the woman in the story. The one who lost her child. The one who searched through pain and ash for something to live for. The one who danced not to be seen but to survive. At first my feet felt stiff like they needed permission to shine. But the music gave it. And suddenly I was flying. Not like Isabel. Not sharp. Not crisp. But raw. The way only grief teaches you to move. When the solo ended, the silence was thick. Then applause. Then more. Then the music surged again and the story continued. I don't remember most of the second act. It passed like a river carrying me home. When the final curtain fell and I stood at center stage with the other dancers, my hands shaking, my chest heaving, I finally looked up at the crowd. The entire hall was on its feet. Miss Wong clapped from the wings, silent but proud. And then, I saw her. Hannah. Seated in the fourth row. Alone. Wearing a pale blue shawl, hair pinned back in a simple twist. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her. Finer lines around her eyes, a slightly thinner face. But it was her. And she was watching me. Not clapping. Not smiling. Just watching. Our eyes locked across the velvet air of the theater. And for one fleeting second, I wasn't afraid. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. Because tonight, I had danced the woman out of me that David once couldn't see. And Hannah, she was just another audience member. The applause still echoed faintly in my ears as I walked the narrow hallway back to the dressing room. My skin still shimmered with sweat under the stage lights. The lace at my collar stuck gently to my neck. No one stopped me. The crew parted quietly, offering nods of respect, even admiration, but I passed them like a shadow, focused only on the next breath. The next step. I reached the door with my name scribbled hastily in chalk on the frame. Laura Bennett, understudy. I pushed it open. Inside, the soft scent of roses lingered. A small bouquet rested on the bench. But it wasn't the flowers that caught my eye. It was the envelope. Cream-colored, thick, placed precisely at the center of my vanity. No name on the front. But I knew who it was from before I even touched it. I sat down, peeled the flap back and unfolded the single page. The handwriting was elegant. Slanted, delicate. The ink slightly smudged in places like tears had brushed the edges. Or, if you're reading this, it means you've danced. And I was in the audience. I didn't plan to come. I swear I didn't. But something told me I had to. Maybe guilt. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the part of me that's always wondered what it felt like to live your life instead of mine. I owe you the truth. I always knew David loved me more. He never said it outright, but he didn't have to. It was in the way he spoke about you. Polite. Distant. Like someone describing a coworker, not a wife. And yet I played along. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. That I was just an old friend. That I only saw him a few times. That I was not responsible for the coldness in your marriage. But I was. And tonight I saw what you've held inside all these years. You moved like someone who had to break her own ribs to breathe again. I cried, Laura. And I don't cry easily. You were never the shadow. I'm leaving tomorrow. You won't see me again. And I don't want him anymore. But I needed you to know. If I had seen you dance like that years ago, I never would have let him have you. Hannah. I folded the letter slowly. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. There was a time when I would have clung to these words like a starving thing, replaying each sentence, reading between lines for meaning, apology, vindication. But not tonight. Tonight I felt nothing but stillness. Not the cold kind, the clean kind. I stood, walked to the small sink by the corner of the dressing room, and reached for the metal tray where used makeup wipes and tissue clippings were discarded. I lit a match, held the letter to the flame, watched as the edges curled inward, darkened, then turned to ash. I didn't need to keep it. Not anymore. Later that night, back at the dorm, I pulled out the journal I kept by my bedside. Not the one for choreography. The other one. The one I'd started after the divorce. The one I wrote in only after performances or during moments of unraveling. I flipped past pages filled with fragments. Today I danced after vomiting from anxiety. Miss Wong said I held tension in my jaw. I said I'm used to it. I watched David eat soup and felt like I wasn't real. I stopped on a blank page and began to write. David never hit me. He never yelled. His cruelty was colder than that. It was the absence of being seen. The way he said thanks without looking up. The way he called me Laura, like I was a secretary. The way he told jokes to others but not to me. The way he kept Hannah's birthday in his calendar and forgot mine. The way he kissed my forehead instead of my lips. It wasn't betrayal that undid me. It was invisibility. I set the pen down. The lights flickered slightly as someone in the hallway turned off the main switch. From the window I could see the alley behind the studio. Dim. But not menacing. Just quiet. I closed the journal. Slid it into the drawer. And for the first time since waking up in 1988, I truly felt like the past had been set down. Not carried. Not avenged. Just let go. 3 weeks passed like the hush between notes. No scandals. No surprises. No calls from David. Not even whispers of Hannah. Just routine. Stretch, rehearse, correct. Perform, sleep, repeat. I liked it that way. I didn't want applause echoing through my bones anymore. I wanted peace to seep into the quiet hollows I had carved in myself over years of being someone else's wife. The troupe moved on from the red thread. Isabel recovered and returned to dance. We nodded when we crossed paths, polite, respectful, distant. Miss Wong kept me busy, solos, partnering work, assisting juniors. Nothing fancy. Nothing front page. Until one morning she handed me a letter. Open it, she said, arms crossed, voice unreadable. I did. Inside was an invitation. Tokyo International Performance Exchange, curated showcase. A single solo. Just me. Representing the troupe. I blinked once. Then again. Me? I asked. Miss Wong nodded. Why? Because you remember what dance is for. I didn't cry. But I sat very still for a long time. The weeks leading up to Tokyo blurred. Late-night practices, costume fittings, music selection. I chose a piece without words. Just piano, slow at first, then swelling into something bold, bright, unafraid. I didn't choreograph a tragedy. This would be a rebirth. I flew to Tokyo alone. No entourage. No fanfare. The venue was smaller than I expected. An intimate theater, velvet seats curving in a gentle arc around the stage. No lights in my eyes. No fog machines or projections. Just floor and silence and a single beam of white light. Perfect. Before the performance I stood in the wings, dressed in a version of the red dress. The same one I had worn the day I walked back into the dance studio for the first time. But now it was altered. Firmer. Stronger. Tailored not to David's gaze or the world's expectations, but to my body exactly as it was now. Worn in the chest. Steady in the spine. The fabric shimmered softly under the light. I stepped onto the stage. The music began. And I moved. No longer to mourn. No longer to survive. But to celebrate. Every scar became choreography. Every silence became rhythm. Every time I'd swallowed grief became flight. I danced not for David, not for Hannah, not even for the crowd. I danced because I was still here. And I wasn't afraid to take up space anymore. When it ended there was silence. Then applause. Longful. Rising. But I didn't wait for an encore. I bowed once low. Then walked off stage into the wings. Backstage someone stood waiting. He wasn't with the crew. He wore a pressed black shirt, sleeves rolled, hands tucked into his pockets. A soft camera hung at his side. We had met once during tech rehearsal. He was part of the International Exchange's documentation team. A photographer named Julian. Quiet. Observant. The kind of man who didn't interrupt energy. He only captured it. He smiled slightly as I approached, not speaking yet. Did you get the shot? I asked. He tilted his head as if thinking. I didn't try, he said. I just watched. That surprised me. I didn't want to flatten it into an image, he added. Some things deserve to stay whole. We stood in silence. Then he reached into his jacket and handed me a folded Polaroid. Not of the stage. Not of the dance. It was a photo of me standing in the hallway earlier that day, looking at my reflection half lit by stage light. Alone. Come. I stared at it. Did I look nervous? You looked ready, he said. I smiled. Not shy. Just quiet. Thank you, I said. He nodded once. Thank you for the reminder. I tilted my head. Of what? That not everything worth seeing happens under the spotlight. That night I walked back to the hotel with a shawl over my shoulders and my heels dangling from my hand. The city lights pulsed softly. Tokyo buzzed beneath my feet, but inside me, stillness. Not emptiness. Presence. When I reached the room I slipped the Polaroid into my journal. Not between pages of sorrow but in the very last one. I picked up my pen and wrote. The girl who once begged to be chosen now chooses herself. I closed the book. No lock. No ceremony. Just closure. From the window the city glowed, millions of lives blooming, breaking, beginning again. And somewhere down there, in a quiet seat at the edge of the stage, a man had watched me dance not as an understudy, not as someone's wife, not as a second chance, but as myself. And I knew with final certainty. The stage was never his. It was never hers. It was always mine. The end.